Hello. This is Bruce. If you were here in person, he wouldn't really visit. He's not really that social. He doesn't mind the quarantine. Anyways, um, we're gonna we're gonna talk about doing a drawing that tries to create deep space, and we're going to use the spatial indicators that were in the PowerPoint on purpose. We're gonna exaggerate our use of them in order to demonstrate, play with them, like fool around with them. Just use this drawing. It's like our still life drawings that we have been doing, but we're gonna exaggerate how big and how small some things are, how dark and how light they are, in order to really create this deep illusionistic space so that you have those tools in your pocket for your futures. So I set up a still life on this table. I'll show you a picture of it. I'll post this also. So as you can see, I used repetition. Always a good idea when you're setting up a still life to use repetition. It creates unity. I used variety, like a variety of sized objects. And the fabric also helps create unity. When you're setting up your still life for this project, if you don't have this much space, you can make a tiny still life and zoom in. Might be a little bit harder to get some information, but you can, accommodate to your situation. That's fine. So you want to remember while you're setting up this still life, foreground, middle ground, background. And it can be very simple, but the stuff that's close to you, you want to make sure it has some detail. Like I put this shell here, it's got a little bit of detailed information. Details, if you remember from the spatial indicator thing, we can only see them when things are close. So if you include something with some detail in the foreground, close to the viewer, it will further that idea that it's very close to us. The stuff that's way in the background, which you can't see, but there's a vase back there. I guess I can show you the picture while we talk about it. That green vase in the background. I won't include much detail on that in my drawing, and that will help the viewer's mind place it in the distance. So when you're setting up your still life, think some objects in the foreground, some objects in the middle, and an object or two in the back. When you draw this drawing, it's going to be just like we always do. You start with process line, you start with citing. It's almost like doing sort of like 3 drawings in one. So the stuff that's closest to you, they'll all be relatively proportionate to each other, the way they look in real life. In this instance, the boot, the shoe, the stuff will be like a regular drawing. It'll be low on the page and large and pretty normal looking. Now the stuff that's in the middle, which would be, say that second boot in the apple, and there's a mug in there. I don't know if you can see, it's very similar in color and value to the fabric. I'm going to shrink it, which is going to be weird, and it'll make it like it always freaks students out. Like, how do I do that? Well, you do it just like you did the big drawing, because you're shrinking things and making them larger anyway on the page normally. So maybe it will help to think of it sort of like 3 drawings. So the one in the foregrounds, everything's proportionate to each other and it's big. In the middle, everything's proportionate to each other and it's a little smaller. And then in the distance, everything's proportionate to each other and it's very tiny. Also in the foreground, it'll be dark and light, high contrast, lots of information. In the middle contrast, some information. And in the back, barely touch it. To me, that's the fun part. You can gestural drawing it in there, blur it out, and that's fine. That only pushes it further back. So, okay, I'm going to do a little demonstration. Try not to show you my shoulder the entire time like last time. But I'm not making any promises. Okay, I forgot. I have to set myself up so I can see and you can see. That's the tricky part. All right, and that's pretty decent, I guess. Is it? Sorry, team. I had it all set up, but then... Okay. So, like always, you want to start with process line drawing. You don't start by trying to render something completely. The boot rendered completely, the shell rendered completely, the apple. You start real loose with just little tiny notes to yourself on the page. Where am I putting what? So I'm going to start with this boot. Now I want to exaggerate how close it is to the viewer. So I'm going to crop it off of the bottom of the page, and I'm going to make it very large. So this is the heel, the toe. Boy, I made it so large, I'm not even going to fit it on the page very good. Let me see here. So remember these marks, you guys? These are notes to self. As you can see, I'm not drawing a boot. I'm showing myself, okay, when you draw the boot, Deb, put it here. Wait, that's wrong. Erase that. Put it here. Wait, that's wrong. Erase that. Why do we do that? Because it's way less heartbreaking, right? To erase something that you did real fast and loose than it is to erase something that you spent a real long time on. So it's sort of a way of, what do you want to say? Taking care of yourself. Can you guys even see this? Probably hardly at all. Sorry, the light's kind of crappy. I'll try to draw these a little darker. As you know, we usually make process line drawings very light so that so they're easy to erase, because mistakes are literally part of the process. Doing it wrong, air quotes there, is how we do it. We do it wrong and then we fix it, and then we, it's not wrong. It's just how it works. Now down here, parallel with here, I'm going to put that shell and make it real big. The shell is actually, and I'll put the image up there. The shell is actually very small, right, compared to everything. But I want it to feel very close. So I'm cropping it off the page. When things are cropped, our brain feels like it's so close to us that we can't even hold it all in our line of vision. And like it's literally in your face. So cropping, boy, that heel's giving me grief. Mostly because I feel like I'm sitting at this terribly awkward angle so that you can see what I'm doing. Should have maybe done this before before I started. Okay. So this is the boot. This is the shell. This is one of the apples. Here's a little fabric. And there's fabric coming up here. Now, behind that, say I'm going to throw in a little more fabric, and it's like here, fold of fabric. Now there's an apple behind this boot that isn't that much smaller than this apple to me, but I'm going to make it half the size, 3/4 of the size. Can you see that? Like here's the apple, this is the full size. I'm going to make the middle ground apple smaller. This will exaggerate. The viewer's mind will instantly interpret that as, oh yeah, that must be getting further away. And I'm going to overlap it a little bit with the boot, which it doesn't really. But remember, overlapping is a very convincing indicator of space. How could something be in front of something else, if there was no space? Okay, now there's another boot back there. In real life, that boot is probably just a quarter, it's probably 2/3 as big as this boot in the foreground. But again, this is my middle ground drawing, and I'm going to exaggerate it. So if this boot is this long, the middle ground boot, I'm going to make it like this long, small. Now that's going to throw things off. You're going to have to do a little bit of inventing. Oh no, after all this time where I'm like, no inventing. Now you're going to have to do a little inventing. So that means like you want that boot, you want to do all your good drawing skills where you can create believable structure by looking close and using sighting and comparing proportions and all your usual good stuff, your process lines and everything. But where it doesn't, because you made it smaller, you might have to sort of stretch out a distance between two things or condense a distance between two things. That's okay. for the sake of this drawing, because in this drawing, what you really want to do, your main goal, is to create illusionistic space. Okay, boot number 2. Now behind this apple on my table is a green cup. And actually in real life it's like this big. But I'm going to draw it like this big because that will make it feel further away. I'm also going to move it up the page. Now remember, the further up the page, the more distant. That's another spatial indicator. The bottom of the page, things are closest to us. So really the apple is like, or rather the mug is right here. But I'm going to move it like up a little bit, which means I'll have to fake it. I'll have to draw some imaginary fabric and be here. I'll have to stretch out what I see. But that's okay, because I can observe reality and, still get real information, enough that it will look real. Okay, the mug. Okay, fabric. Here. Now, when you make your still life, I used fabric because it makes me think of a landscape, So if you have an old towel or blanket or something, you might want to throw down under, like on the table. I used another boot on the table, and then I put the fabric on top of it. This will kind of get elevated a little bit, which will be helpful for your drawing because you do want things to move up the page. And then also, like I said, it creates sort of a landscape illusion, which I think is kind of fun because we're trying to make this feel vast. So here's my fabric. Now in real life, this big hill of fabric comes over to here, but I'm going to make it sort of smaller. That means, again, I'll have to invent a little, fill in the gaps. And I'm going to it kind of goes here. And then behind this mug is another apple. So I kind of am running out of fabric. So there's another little bit of fabric there. I'm going to put in over here. So I'm finding information and I'm just stretching it out or moving it over so that it still is referring to reality, but I'm twisting it to serve my needs, which sounds a great deal more sinister than, I was thinking that this was. Okay, so here's third apple. Really, third apple is very similar in size to this apple, but I'm going to make it much smaller because that will make it feel farther away. And then there's this green vase, which again, if I used citing, the green vase is actually as big as this, but that would make it, can you see if I drew that big vase back here, how it would feel like it was coming forward? So I'm going to draw a little green vase. My old ellipses. Welcome back, ellipses. Actually, it needs to be up a little bit more. Oh, I forgot to tell you, paper. So in your selection of papers, if you did pick up the paper from the school, I know a number of you didn't, so I haven't really been stressing paper. And really, it's secondary. Mainly I want you to observe and draw. But if you did pick up paper, I decided to use the cream-colored paper with the tooth texture for this drawing. You can draw on the toothy side or on the smoother side. It doesn't matter. It's all just figuring out how it works. This is going to be in charcoal, so the tooth, will be pretty visible, but it will also hold pigment in those sort of pockets. Okay, little vase. And then way in the distance, though, I have a chair behind the vase in my dining room here. And I'm going to make the chair like tiny back here. Really, it's a lot bigger. I don't have to draw it much because this is the distance. So it can just be just a quick gestural sort of drawing. It doesn't have to really look like anything. Okay, this leaves, and then here I'm going to find some stuff. You know how I like to say, if the negative space is too much, like this is half the page, right? I would get like a C on composition, wouldn't I? But I'll rectify it. Then find some architectural element to lead the eye in, through your negative space. This is my doorway. Back here, there's like a countertop. Okay. in our negative space, when you get to that portion of the drawing, if you want, you can fill it in with like more pretend landscape. We can get really surreal. Some of these drawings work out better if you turn your paper in the landscape position. It's harder for me to draw on this, like with my laptop as a video in the landscape position, so that's why I went with this vertical position. Okay, now we're gonna draw this drawing in charcoal, and you can begin with giant vine charcoal if you want. It's much more forgiving, but either way, drawing a value drawing in charcoal is similar to the subtractive drawing we did in the last piece. It always ends up being additive and subtractive, really. Not always, but you know. So everything in the, but I guess not always, but often, most of the time, let's say. So in the foreground, things are going to be dark and light. Black and white and middle grays. We've, like, think of the autumn when you look at a big bunch of trees hanging out there in the autumn and squint. So when you see a bunch of trees in the foreground, you see they're so brilliantly colored, right? And you can see every leaf. But way in the distance, they're just a smudge of color. So that is atmospheric perspective. It is sharp and diminishing detail. So everything in the foreground is going to be dark and light. That will pull it closer to the foreground. So squint. And as you can see, I'm beginning by filling in areas of value. Okay, like I'm not trying to draw this whole boot first. That would be a heartbreaker. What if I drew that whole boot and it turned out it was in the wrong place, or I drew it too light, too dark, and so everything had to be adjusted. Plus, in terms of unity, you want, as I always say, you want to keep your drawing tool moving around the page. This is one whole drawing. It's not 15 drawings, one of a boot, one of a shell, one of an apple. It's one whole drawing, and it will feel more whole, and it will develop more wholly if you keep moving your drawing tool around the page. Don't let half of the drawing be unfinished while the other half is totally finished. You can kind of always tell beginning work, it becomes very flat and sort of falls apart. It has an unreal quality to it. Okay, so you're not going to do that. You're going to keep your drawing tool moving around the page. So as you can see, I'm going to break that. As you can see, I'm putting in areas of value. I'm not going in here and drawing a lot of lines. I'm squinting, I'm finding the darkest areas, and it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Certainly not ever, and then certainly not at this stage. Like, we're just getting that drawing tool moving around the page, getting some things started. Okay. And then this in the distance is going to stay very soft and gray. So I'm not pressing very hard. I want that to stay far away. Okay, but this in the foreground, now I'm going to start building value. Now I'm really unhappy with the shape of this heel, people. I'm holding this thing at this drawing tablet. Can you guys still see? At such an awkward angle that it makes it really hard to see what the heck I'm doing. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I know I say that all the time. Like, it's a process. They really aren't mistakes. They're just figuring things out. I'm squinting. So my lighting is pretty crummy. You know, really, I don't think there's anything wrong with setting up an itty bitty still life. Maybe I should have demonstrated that instead. Oh, I just dropped my eraser. Criminy. Creaminy. Okay. Okay, and this is the apple. I have a cloth here, so I can blend with it. So this boot back here, I'm trying not to get too into it because I want it to stay very middle. I want this one to be the one that's closest. This drawing, you guys, is exaggeration. We're finding real information. We're finding accurate structure, and we're finding, oh. Somebody needs to put, like, maybe The Onion needs to make an article about people's pets on conference calls and work videos, because it's like, this is Louie. He's really friendly. He's blocking everything. Oh my goodness, Louie. He's probably going to meow here in a minute. Usually he's quite the meower. So resist the urge, everybody, to draw contour lines. Okay? As you can see, I haven't drawn any. Maybe this is almost a contour line here, but the boot kind of has a groove in it there. I can't believe my cat. Oh, now what's he gonna do? He's probably gonna move everything around, like knock it all off. That would be hilarious. Okay, how are we doing? I'm looking at the drawing in there. It's kind of weird looking. That's okay. So as you can see, this is hardly readable as a shell, but I'm not unsatisfied because I can see for myself how it could develop into a shell. So that's how the drawing is. I wish I could think of the perfect analogy for it. Oh my gosh. Look at him. You guys, he's making himself at home in the still life. That is the fun. I'm making it up. I can't even see my drawing. Maybe my still life. Okay. As you can see, this so things are getting darker and darker in the foreground. I'm totally making it up because Louis is grooming himself on my boot and blocking everything. I should make him go away, right? Oh gosh. Okay. I have a rag here. I'm going to soften some stuff up in the back. Okay. You guys, I can't believe that. That is so funny. Okay, boot. Now it's funny, when I turn around and look at the video, I can get a better view of my boot than I can from the angle I'm sitting at. I'm going to turn my boot. Just need to get it more structurally sound. Oh, this is like all hope is lost. Okay, so now you can blend with your hand some if you want, but don't like try to make it smooth and perfect because nothing is smooth and perfect. It's not necessary. Really, things can be very loose and very drawerly, but if the darks are in convincing places and to the lights, then our brain will put it together just fine. So don't spend a lot of time smoothing everything out. That's another sort of beginning drawing person thing. Not always. Some artists, are into that or whatever for the long haul. But a lot of times I feel like it's that same old thing. We have an idea of what looks good. Oh my gosh, you guys. You can draw with your eraser. Boy, that's pretty bad back here, this boot. Did you hear me just criticize my own drawing? Bad, bad, bad. Okay. Can't even hardly see it. I might have to kick Louie out. I would draw him in. Too bad he wasn't there from the get-go, huh, you guys? That would have been cool. Okay, so we're developing along pretty good, I would say. You're getting the general idea? So this apple being very close to the viewer has a sharp edge, and I have to squint. When you're drawing objects that are in color, as you might be, try as hard as you can to think about how dark or light they are, more than you're thinking about how bright or dull they are. It's a real tricky move when you start drawing with color. So anyway, I'm squinting at that apple, and in my head, it's like you're trying to transform it into black and white to get a thought for how dark is it really. Okay, I want that apple to be close, and I want this guy to be really close, so I should probably sharpen it up a little bit. I'm squinting at it. When you draw in value, remember when we were doing hatch marks, you want to squint. It really, it's like a super necessary tool for seeing general values. Drop my other eraser. Okay. Hold on, are we still in the picture? Am I in the picture? We're in the picture. Okay. So, are you getting the idea? You exaggerate the size. You exaggerate the contrast of dark and light in the front, and you exaggerate the lack of contrast of dark and light in the back. Let's see, what else? You make the objects that are closest to the viewer very low on the page and very large and cropped. Definitely cropping off the page. You would definitely want to use cropping. Let's see what else we got going on here. This apple. You know, I always say the devil's in the details. I know everybody says that. I just mean in drawing, the details are always what sells it. You find a couple cool details and you really pay attention and slow down on them, and there's a lot of payoff in that. It inspires a lot of trust of the viewer in you. You know, it doesn't take that much, just a few interesting elements to keep our attention. So let's see, we have proportion, big things at the bottom, contrast, placement on the page, and overlapping. Ah, yes, I'm glad I remembered to say that. So a lot of times I feel like students do this drawing and they just place things so that they aren't. The fabric is helpful because it sort of overlaps everything, which is good. But make sure you have things that are tucked in underneath things, objects in front of other objects. Sometimes students will place object, 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 and it really, again, it becomes pretty obvious, oh yeah, those spatial indicators work. That just flattened that object right out. So back here, flattened that drawing out. Overlapping really convinces us, so don't forget to actually use overlapping. It's going to be important. Squinting. There's a shadow over here. There's my big cat. I can't even see it. Jeez. So as far as all this in the background, so you might want to find an image of like a sunset or something like that. And you can play around with this. So I'm going to pretend like this is the background. And if you look, find a nice image of the clouds, or you could feel it, slightly value it. Yeah, my chair. I was going to put my chair in back there. I'll erase it. So back in here, stuff hardly has to, now you can see where it's back, we're back to the subtractive drawing. I put online previous student works, and you can see on Blackboard, you can see the way some students would, create sort of like a moonscape. It lends itself to the moonscape. Gosh, did I ever finish the conversation I was having about paper? I don't know. But anyway, if you have the gray paper, I usually do this project with the gray paper, and I let people use the black and the white Conti. If you have some experience with that and you want to try it, go for it. I have this warning. Do not blend the black and the white together. It becomes this really ugly, you cannot harmonize it, weird silvery gray that just stands out and looks terrible. Save the white for last, the very last thing. Do not blend it, lay it on, and don't touch it, and use it like with reservation. Okay, team, I feel like this is good enough to get you started. Ooh, did you see that? Now look at that mysterious chair. So, okay, do you see the deep space, you guys? Deep space. Look out. You see the background? You just don't have, I kind of love that drawing the best. You don't have to barely suggest stuff in the background. Deep space. A little bit more eraser drawing in here. Oh no. I always say I'm done and then I'm not done, right? All right, team. I would do more in this apple, but my cat's laying on it. So that's your beginning demo. I hope you just have fun with it. Think of it like 3 drawings. The foreground, big objects, low, dark, and light. The middle ground, a little smaller than they are for real and grayed out, less information. The background, super barely drawn, very gray, tiny, exaggerate, really exaggerate, okay? Exaggerate the big, exaggerate the small, because we're trying to make deep space. All right, I think that's good enough. Maybe I can square this up. No, that's not very helpful, is it? For us to get you started, to see where we're headed with this one. Okay, team. I hope you're all doing okay. I really miss you. Teaching online. But hang in there. Keep your chin up. Everything changes all the time. Okay, friends. I'll talk to you soon.